in the shadowed heart of an ancient kingdom, where towering spires of ivory stone pierced the endless sky and rivers of silver wound through emerald valleys, a single arrow whistled through the night air and buried itself in the throat of the royal huntsman. The princess, hidden behind a curtain of willow branches, watched in frozen horror as the man she had secretly loved for months collapsed into the mud, his blood soaking the earth like spilled ink. She did not scream. She could not. For the stranger dying before her eyes was no ordinary wanderer. He was the one soul who had ever truly seen her, not as a crown or a title, but as a girl with dreams too vast for palace walls. And in that moment, as his hand reached weakly toward her through the darkness, Princess Elara felt her entire world fracture into 1,000 irreparable pieces. If you believe in the quiet, stubborn power of kindness, in the beauty of second chances, and in love that dares to defy every rule ever written, then pause right here with me. Hit that like button if your heart is already racing. Leave a comment telling me your favorite fairy tale or the one dream you've never dared speak aloud. Share this video with someone who needs a spark of hope tonight. And subscribe with notifications on so you never miss a story that might remind you why we're all still here. Your support keeps these tales breathing. Elara's earliest memories were not of silk gowns or golden cradles, but of standing on the highest balcony of the palace, her small hands gripping the cold stone balustrade as she stared beyond the kingdom's walls to the distant haze of mountains she was told no princess would ever climb. She must have been 5 or 6, her hair still short and wild, when she first asked her nursemaid why the birds were allowed to fly away while she had to stay. The woman had laughed softly and told her that princesses were too precious to risk on the wind, but that answer only planted a seed of longing deep in Elara's chest, a longing that grew with every passing year. At night, when the palace slept under heavy tapestries and guarded doors, she would press her face to the window glass and imagine herself running through those far-off forests, barefoot and unafraid, with no one to tell her where she could or could not go. Her mother, Queen Isolde, had been the one person who understood that restlessness. Elara remembered her mother's gentle hands braiding flowers into her hair while telling stories of brave women who sailed across stormy seas or negotiated peace between warring kingdoms, not because they wore crowns, but because they carried courage in their hearts. Queen Isolde had promised that one day Elara would see the world beyond the walls, that duty and freedom could walk hand in hand. But then came the fever that swept through the palace like a silent thief, claiming the queen in a single winter week when Elara was only 8. After that, the palace grew quieter. King Aldrich, devastated by grief, wrapped his remaining family in layers of protection that felt more like iron than love. Guards multiplied, windows were barred with ornate grills for safety, tutors arrived with books carefully edited to remove any hint of rebellion or escape. Elara learned to hide her dreams behind perfect posture and polite smiles, but they never stopped burning inside her. By the time she reached 17, Elara had mastered the art of being unseen even while standing in the center of every room. At grand banquets she could glide through crowds like a ghost, nodding at the right moments, laughing softly at jokes she barely heard, all while her mind wandered to the maps she secretly studied in the palace library's forbidden upper shelves. Those maps showed rivers that twisted like dragons, forests so dense no light touched the ground, and coastlands where the sea met the sky in endless blue. She would trace them with her fingertip late at night, by candlelight, memorizing every curve and inlet, whispering the foreign names under her breath like prayers. Sometimes she pressed her cheek to the cool parchment and imagined the salt wind on her skin, the sound of waves crashing without permission from any king. It was on one such night, fleeing yet another endless banquet where suitors from neighboring kingdoms droned about alliances and dowries, that Elara first slipped beyond the palace orchards into the true wild woods. Rain fell in heavy sheets turning past rivers of mud, but she didn't care. She traded her embroidered gown for a plain brown cloak stolen from a laundry maid, and ran until her lungs ached and the lights of the palace disappeared behind curtains of leaves. Lightning split the sky, illuminating an ancient oak whose branches spread like protective arms. Beneath it stood a young man, soaked to the bone, trying to shield a small fire with his body. He looked up as she stumbled into the clearing, surprise flashing across his face, but he didn't reach for the knife at his belt. Instead, he simply shifted to make room under the half-dry shelter of his cloak and said nothing at all. His name was Rowan. He was 20, the son of a village huntsman who had taught him to read the forest the way scholars read books. He lived lightly on the land, tracking deer for distant villages, sleeping under stars more often than roofs. That first night they spoke little, only enough for her to learn his name and for him to offer her the warmth of the fire. But something in the way he listened, without expectation or judgment, made Elara's guarded heart unclench just a fraction. When the storm finally passed and dawn painted the sky rose gold, she left without giving her name, but she knew she would return, and return she did, again and again, over weeks that stretched into months. Each meeting unfolded like a secret, flower opening petal by petal. Rowan taught her things no palace tutor ever could: how to move silently through underbrush so as not to startle deer, how to find edible berries even in late autumn, how to read the sky for coming weather. In exchange, she told him stories from the forbidden books, tales of women who disguised themselves as knights, of queens who ruled alone and wisely. He listened with the same quiet attention he gave to birdsong, never interrupting, never dismissing. For the first time in her life, Elara felt truly heard. There were moments that lived in her memory like jewels. One afternoon in early winter, the first snow falling soft and silent, Rowan led her to a frozen waterfall where ice had formed in delicate curtains. He pressed his palm to the surface and showed her how the water still moved beneath, slow and unstoppable. "Nothing can truly stop the flow," he said quietly, "not even winter." She looked at him then and felt something shift inside her chest, something both terrifying and inevitable. Another time, during a golden summer evening, they lay in a meadow watching clouds drift, and she confessed her childhood dream of sailing beyond the maps. Without hesitation, Rowan began describing the smell of the open ocean, the way gulls cried over ships, the feeling of wind that carried no scent of palace gardens. He had never seen the sea himself, but his father's stories had painted it vividly, and he gave those images to her like a gift. As seasons turned, their feelings deepened into something neither dared name at first. Rowan never touched her beyond a steadying hand on rough paths, never asked questions about the life she fled each time she came to him. But Elara noticed how his eyes lingered when she laughed, how he always saved the ripest berries for her, how he carved a small wooden bird and left it on their usual log without a word. She began to dream of him at night, not the polite, waking dreams of princesses, but fierce, aching ones where she ran to him without looking back. Yet every return to the palace brought fresh reminders of impossibility. Her father spoke more urgently of marriage alliances. Advisers watched her closely, noting her distracted gaze. Guards reported strange footprints near the orchard wall. The world was closing in. One autumn evening, as leaves fell in spirals of red and gold, Rowan finally spoke the words that changed everything. They were sitting by a small fire in a hollow where no patrol would find them. The air smelled of wood smoke and coming frost. He took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin, and told her he loved her. Not the princess he had never truly known, but the girl who gasped at shooting stars, who cried when she found an injured rabbit and nursed it for days, who dreamed aloud of freedom with a fire that humbled him. He offered no promises of castles or safety, only the truth of his heart. Elara felt tears slip down her cheeks as she whispered that she loved him too, that he had become the horizon she had always longed for. But love, especially forbidden love, casts long shadows. Whispers reached the king's ears, servants noticing mud on gowns, guards finding signs of passage through the woods. King Aldrich, still haunted by the loss of his wife, could not bear the thought of losing his daughter to scandal or danger. He ordered patrols doubled, traps set for intruders. Elara felt the noose tightening, yet could not stay away. Each meeting became more desperate, more precious. They spoke of running, of vanishing into the wild lands beyond the kingdom's reach. But fear held her back, fear for Rowan's life, fear of breaking her father's already fragile heart. The night of the arrow came on a moonless evening thick with mist. Rowan had warned her not to come, sensing increased patrols, but Elara could not bear another day without seeing him. They met deeper in the forest than ever before, in a small clearing ringed by ancient oaks. For a fleeting hour they held each other, speaking in whispers of a future they barely dared imagine. Then came the twang of a bowstring, sharp as fate itself. Rowan staggered, hand clutching his throat as blood welled dark and swift. Elara screamed, this time a roar, broken sound as she caught him before he fell completely. His eyes found hers, wide with shock and something worse, apology. Chaos erupted. Shouts of gods crashed through the trees. Arrows hissed past. Elara dragged Rowan into the undergrowth, her fine cloak tearing on thorns, her hands slick with his blood. She moved on pure instinct, following paths he had once shown her in brighter days. Branches whipped her face, roots tried to trip her, but she refused to let go. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she whispered over and over, "Stay with me. Please stay with me." At last she found the hidden cave behind a curtain of frozen vines, the place Rowan had called their shelter if rain ever caught them far from safety. There she laid him down on a bed of pine needles, tearing strips from her cloak to press against the wound. His breathing came in shallow gasps, his skin growing colder by the minute. The hours that followed were the longest of Elara's life. She built a tiny fire with trembling hands, melted snow for water, searched her memory for every herb Lord Rowan had shared. She talked to him constantly, childhood stories, palace secrets, every dream she had never told another soul. At times his fingers twitched in hers. Once he managed a faint squeeze that sent hope soaring through her chest. Outside, search parties roamed the woods calling her name, torches flickering like angry stars. She knew that if they were found, Rowan would be executed as a traitor and she imprisoned for life. Yet she could not leave him. As dawn finally grayed the cave mouth, his fever broke, the bleeding slowed, color returned faintly to his lips. Elara collapsed beside him in exhausted tears, relief so profound it felt like rebirth. Recovery unfolded slowly in that hidden place. Days blurred into weeks as winter deepened. Elara foraged for roots and dried berries, hunted small game with snares Rowan weakly instructed her to set, kept vigil through long nights when fever returned. In the intimacy of survival, walls neither had known existed crumbled completely. Rowan confessed his fear that he had dragged her into danger. Lara admitted her terror of a life without him. They spoke of childhood wounds, his mother's early death, her father's suffocating grief, and found solace in shared understanding. Elara discovered strength she had never imagined, setting broken bones for injured animals, enduring cold that numbed her fingers, facing the possibility of permanent exile. Rowan watched her with quiet awe, calling her his brave heart when he had breath enough to speak. Spring arrived softly, snow melting into streams that sang day and night. Green unfurled across the forest like hope made visible. Rowan could finally walk short distances, leaning on her shoulder, and they began to dream aloud again. He spoke of distant lands across the eastern sea where no king's lore reached, where people lived by the rhythm of tides instead of crowns. Elara felt duty pulling at her like chains, her father's inevitable grief, the kingdom's need for stability, but the thought of returning to a life of silent smiles and locked doors was unbearable. One morning, as mist rose from the river and birds filled the air with song, she made her choice. With charcoal on birch bark, she wrote a letter to her father, the hardest word she had ever shaped. She told him she was safe and deeply loved, that she had found a life where her heart could breathe. She begged his forgiveness and understanding, promising that the kingdom would endure without her on its throne. Entrusting the letter to a gentle doe that had grown tame around their cave, she prayed it would find its way to the old herb gardener, who had always slipped her extra seeds for window boxes. Then, with nothing but the clothes on their backs and a small bundle of dried food, Elara and Rowan left the cave at dawn. Their journey was long and often hard. They crossed swollen rivers on makeshift rafts, climbed hills where wind howled like wolves, slept under stars that felt closer than palace chandeliers. They faced hunger, cold, and moments of doubt when exhaustion made everything seem impossible. Yet every hardship bound them tighter. Elara learned to navigate by stars Rowan taught her. He learned to trust her instincts when his strength failed. They laughed over small victories, a perfect campfire, a hidden spring, and held each other through nights when fear crept close. Years later, in a distant coastal village where salt wind shaped the trees into perpetual bows, travelers sometimes spoke of a healer woman with forest dark eyes and gentle hands who lived in a small stone cottage with a quiet man whose laugh carried across the waves. Children gathered at their hearth to hear tales of a princess who chose love over a crown, of a stranger who taught her that true freedom lives in a courageous heart. No one ever proved the stories true, yet they spread like wildflowers, carried on the wind to every corner of the world. And somewhere, in a kingdom that had learned to heal without its lost princess, an aging king kept a single piece of birch bark on his desk. He read it often, tears tracing familiar paths down his cheeks, and slowly, very slowly began to understand that the greatest gift a parent can give is the courage to let go. If this story has reached into your chest and touched something tender there, if it has reminded you that dreams are worth protecting and love is always worth the risk, then please right now take a moment to like this video, share it with someone whose heart needs lifting tonight, and subscribe for more stories that refuse to let hope die. You are the reason these tales keep traveling. And before we part, I have one special request in the comments below. Please simply type the word freedom if you believe, even a little, that every heart deserves to choose its own path. Seeing those words will warm me more than any hearth fire. Thank you for walking this long road with Elara and Rowan. May their courage light your own hidden paths, wherever they may lead.